Data brokers exist to aggregate, analyze, and then sell private information about people, including children. Some of that information was coming out of school systems.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to wherever you're joining from around the world. It's a great honor for me to host you today from here in Washington, D.C. Thank you for joining our timely response series for parents, teachers, and caregivers. My name is Samir Mansour, and I'm the founder of No Limit Generation. We at No Limit Gen realize that not everyone has access to the world's leading child well-being professionals, especially in times of challenge. So our mission is to bring the professionals to you. In this way, we can create supportive environments for children to heal, rise, and thrive into their full potential. Our website, www.nolimitgeneration, offers a range of practical child well-being training videos on many timely topics, everything from children's mental health, protection, and well-being to healing practices and activities. We would greatly appreciate it if you could support us by sharing our content with the people in your network. All our content and programming is made possible with your generous support, so please consider a donation through our website so that we can continue to support you through quality training and workshops. A quick note before we get started, we are video recording this for publication online so that you might access it later. If you have your camera on, please feel free to turn it off at this time in addition to your microphone. Please mute yourself. Additionally, all our live broadcasts are designed to be participatory. There's a chat box on the right corner of your screen, so if you have any questions, feel free to ask. We might ask you questions. Please, let's engage in a dialogue throughout this conversation. And so now on to the show. The topic of today's event is protecting children online. And I'm particularly excited about this because it's a topic that I know so little about, and I'm ready to learn. In the recent few months, there's over 1.5 billion children who have vacated the classrooms as social distancing measures were put in place around the world. As a result, many of our children's social and educational lives have shifted online. While this shift presents a great opportunity for social connection, innovative new learning styles, and creative expression, it comes with it potential risks. In the last few months, there have been significant increases in cyber crimes against children, ranging from sexual exploitation to cyberbullying and fraud. Additionally, parents, educators, and caregivers might be inadvertently exposing children to many of these risks. My hope is that today's conversation will equip us with the practical steps to understand what these vulnerabilities are and how we as adults can take the necessary steps to protect our children online. And with that, I'll introduce our speaker today, who is Leah Plunkett, a leading expert in digital privacy law and how digital technologies are impacting children and families. Currently, Leah is an associate dean and professor at University of New Hampshire's Franklin Pierce School of Law. She is also a faculty associate at the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard University. Leah has a long-standing track record of serving children and families. In 2007, she founded the Youth Law Project at New Hampshire Legal Assistance, which handles school discipline, special education, and other matters on behalf of at-risk kids and teens. Leah is also the author of an acclaimed book, Sharonhood, which we'll learn more about soon. And she's joining us today from New Hampshire, where she lives with her husband, 2 kids, and a dog, and apparently a modest vegetable garden. It's a great honor to have you with us today, Leah. What are you growing these days in your garden?
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here. I have a bumper crop of mint right now. And so I've been using that in everything from smoothies to main dishes. My other vegetables are not doing so well, but my mint is thriving, and it's not even a vegetable. And Samir, I have to say, we now have a new addition to the household that I don't think I've had a chance to tell you about, but I'll tell everybody. My 9-year-old got a hamster.
Oh, wow. So a dog and a hamster.
A dog and a hamster. And the hamster.
And mint.
And the mint. The hamster was a reward for having gotten through the digital learning of the pandemic. In March, he had desperately wanted a hamster. We weren't quite ready. And I said, tell you what, at the end of the pandemic, which we're nowhere close to, or at the end of the semester, I'll get you a hamster. So we now have a hamster.
That's amazing. Well, welcome to the family, hamster. Over. So we'll dive right in because I know we've got a lot to cover. Over the last several years, Leah, all our work, education, social lives, so much of it, especially those of our children, have been increasingly shifting into the digital realm. And now with social distancing and quarantine, we've seen an almost complete immersion of our work, education, and social interactions online. So I read an interesting stat lately. Since the quarantine began, we've seen, depending on the social app of choice, anywhere from 20 to 50% more time being spent in the use of these social apps. TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat leading the charts. For children, this can be a great way to create and maintain social connections during this challenging time. At the same time, we know that wherever people are gathering, there's also increased exposures and vulnerabilities, right? So can you talk to us about some of the safety implications of this increased screen time and the risks that our children might be exposed to at this time?
Absolutely. So you are right, Samir, that transitions that were already happening in terms of becoming increasingly digitally connected in our homes and our schools and our communities have just gone at warp speed since the onset of the pandemic. And as we have gone from having brick and mortar places where children spend most of their time, like home and school and after school programs, brick and mortar places with some layer of digital connectivity, which can vary depending on the home or the learning environment, we've gone from having, in an ideal situation, ideal being in terms of public health, kids in just one brick and mortar setting, their home, from which they are trying to do everything digitally. And that is a shift that implicates the types of technologies we use, those of us who are trying to use them, the laws and regulations and policies and the gaps in all of those that exist to protect our children, as well as the norms and behaviors that are evolving. And our kids, as they're trying to do everything digitally, are facing a lot of increased risk, as you said. They're facing an increased risk of having their privacy breached. And that privacy breach can happen in the form of something like Zoom bombing, which was quite prevalent at the beginning of the pandemic, where we had trolls, and I say we because it actually happened to me a couple of times in different contexts, and this is something I research and write on, and they still got past. So, and that was really disturbing. And there was reporting done that indicated that while some of those may have been kind of lone wolf style trolls, a lot of it was actually organized as sort of a right-wing guerrilla reaction to things. And so that was really disturbing. And kids were seeing that, and kids were being exposed to pornographic, racist, violent, and other unacceptable imagery and words. And that's disturbing. We also are seeing privacy breaches for kids being an increased risk, just as more kids' information is going out into the world. So Zoom bombing is a very immediate, very in-your-face, very aggressive form of a privacy breach. But as our kids' information is being increasingly collected, aggregated, analyzed, and in some cases reshared by tech companies or by individuals who might be on the receiving end of the information, whether they're a company employee or someone else, we really actually don't know yet the extent of information that is being picked up about our kids while we are trying to do everything at home with them. But we do know that we already had a lot of weaknesses in the child privacy laws in this country that were already leading to a lot of our kids' private information either being taken by bad actor third parties or being used in unpredictable and I think unacceptable ways by technology companies themselves. And another big area of risk, of course, is that kids are going to be exposed not necessarily to malicious third parties that go the full extent of Zoom bombers, but still malicious third parties who may not have their best interests at heart. So by that, I really do mean everything from somebody who is playing an online game that has a chat function, who starts talking to kids in ways that may not be predatory, but may be uncomfortable, all the way to kids going to YouTube, either for school or for recreation, finding content that is misleading or downright dangerous, and either not knowing how to process that content or thinking it's real. And we know that the YouTube algorithm, some of my colleagues at the Berkman Klein Center and elsewhere did a great report, I think it was last summer, about the way that the YouTube algorithm is designed to push people toward more and more extreme forms of whatever content they were viewing. And so YouTube in and of itself can be a radicalizer of our young people. And at a time when we know that there is both inadvertent and deliberate misinformation out there about our most pressing national and international crises, including the pandemic, including racial justice and dismantling white supremacy, including the growth of international differences in resources around being able to respond to the pandemic. There's so many areas right now where we as individuals and a society cannot act in the absence of correct and complete information that I am really worried about what our kids may be learning that actually undermines not only their ability to learn, but our ability here in the United States at both the state and federal levels to actually be training the next generation of digital citizens to take part in a democracy.
Yeah. So it's so important that, what these children are accessing online are things that are going to be, beneficial to their growth and development, especially at this challenging time when they are spending so much screen time. We want to ensure that, what they are coming across isn't going to further confuse them or worse, harm them. And so, you're the author of an acclaimed book, Parenthood. And congratulations on this book, by the way, which Wired Magazine has called a must-read. So for those of you who are looking for more information on this, please check it out, Parenthood. Leah, for those of us who might be scratching their head at this term, what is parenting really quickly? Because then I have a couple of questions specific to this.
Sure. Parenting means different things to different people. And I apologize for the law professor type answer, but it is the accurate one. I did not invent the term. It is commonly used to refer to what parents do on social media. So it is focused on one group, parents, and it is focused on one type of technology, social media. I think that parents and social media are both vital components of parenting, but as I unpack further in the book, which uses sort of a light case method, law school style, don't worry, it's written for non-attorney, non-law student audiences. So as you very graciously said, Samir, Wired had it on its best read list for everyone. But the way I use it is to mean all the different ways that parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, teachers, coaches, babysitters, nannies, and other trusted adults transmit children's private information digitally. So that's absolutely parents on social media. And actually the debate in my house, maybe I should bring my 9-year-old in, we can have it. He wants me to talk about him on social media, and he wants his own social media accounts, and I say no. So he actually wants me to do more parenting. But parenting happens when a teacher decides to use an ed tech app. So an app to teach reading, an app to teach math. Those are digital technologies that are relying on children's private data in order to function and do their job. And of course, in our current pandemic reality, we're increasingly reliant on those. Parenting also is something as seemingly innocuous as a grandparent who makes a decision to give a child a holiday gift of a watch that is a fitness tracker that has location surveillance built into it, or a nanny who very thoughtfully turns on Alexa on a device to try to make things easier, and all of a sudden Alexa is picking up a lot of private data about that family and that child. So parenting, again, everything that all of us as adults do with our kids' private information using digital technologies.
Got it. And I think you got that definition in pretty clearly and with less legalese speak. So thank you for that.
Good.
So now, as an uncle, and just like many of the parents and caregivers in this audience today, I sometimes share cute, funny, or proud moments of my niece. But when I read your work, I realized that perhaps I can be a little bit more careful about what I post. In the UK, for example, the Children's Commissioner released a report that on average, by the time a child has reached the age of 13, they'll be 1,300 photos of this child online that can be used to compromise this child in the future. Can you share with us, some of the ways in which we might be overexposing these kids, and what are the implications of this oversharing? What can happen with these photos that we're posting?
Sorry, I muted myself to be a good digital citizen so you didn't get background noise. So in Sharenthood, I break down the sharenting risks to kids into 3 big categories. The first are those risks that lead to harms that are criminal or illegal or dangerous. Second are those harms that are legal but invasive and suspect. And third are those harms that are actually not more to the child's sense of self and ability to develop. And in that first category, I would put something like identity theft. So I think that you were referring to some numbers out of England. Other numbers out of England include a recent study by Barclays Bank that found that sharenting, and they were defining it as parents on social media, was going to be responsible for tens of millions of pounds in damage to children through identity theft between now and the next few decades. And that's because even something as innocuous as, I'm so proud I'm expecting a baby. Here's a picture of my newborn baby. Here is my newborn baby's full name. Here is their exact time, place, and date of birth. And then here is a picture of us bringing them home from the hospital. So right there, you are giving away, a full name, a date of birth. You may well be giving away an address based on the picture you're posting or geolocation information you've posted about it. And so, unfortunately, it is not hard these days for malicious third parties to take private identifying information about children and create a fraudulent application for credit in their name. And then before you know it, that child is developing credit that they and their parents never took out, and that can follow them around. And this is a big enough problem that some law enforcement agencies have devoted resources specifically to it. For example, the Utah Attorney General's office has a child online identity fraud unit. I may have their exact title a little bit off, but it's a child online identity fraud unit in the Utah Attorney General's office. Also in this category of criminal and illegal and dangerous behavior, we have families who try to make money on YouTube by doing family prank channels. And I'm putting prank in quotes because sometimes those pranks are not funny. And sometimes not only are they not funny, but they cross the line from just being in bad taste to actually being abusive or neglectful. There was a pretty high-profile instance of this a few years ago, covered extensively by the Washington Post, a YouTube family called Daddy05 that purported to be doing pranks, but crossed the line into behavior that warranted a court actually temporarily removing custody of either one or two of their children for a little bit when viewers of this YouTube content notified authorities. So that's the first category. Second category, the legal but invasive and suspect, has to do more with what happens behind the scenes. So an example in this category, data brokers. Data brokers are a very lightly regulated industry in this country. Vermont, my friendly neighbor to the north here in New Hampshire, recently passed a law that explicitly regulates data brokers, but they're few and far between in terms of states that do that. Data brokers exist to aggregate, analyze, and then sell private information about people, including children, to other entities that will purchase it. To make it more concrete about kids, a study by the Center for Law and Information Policy at Fordham Law School from either 2 or 3 summers ago found at least half a dozen data brokers that were doing this with information about kids as young as 2 years old. And the researchers, this interdisciplinary research team, found that some of that information was coming out of school systems. And their research did not suggest that school systems were knowingly giving it away, but that through devices like, oh, here's an online survey, why don't you give it to your students? And in good faith, teachers or administrators were having the survey done, and the information was actually going to data brokers behind the scenes, and having kids being put on lists of things like 14 and 15-year-old girls who might need family planning services, or really, really intimate, personal, invasive ways of categorizing people. And last but not least, Samir, and this is the one that I hold most in my heart. The others are more threatening. They're threatening to kids' current physical safety and well-being. They're threatening to their ability to access major life opportunities going forward. There's really no meaningful limits at this point on a data broker aggregating information now about 2-year-olds and having that information make its way over time to impact that 2-year-old when they apply for college or a job or certain forms of insurance. So there is a real risk to kids' ability to access future opportunities. But the one kind of at the center of my heart is that we are depriving our kids, whether we mean to or not, of the ability to have childhood be a protected space and a bit of a clean slate so that they can figure out who they are and they can introduce themselves to the people who will meet them along the way, rather than having people say, oh my goodness, I've been seeing you since you were born. And obviously that's more acute for some kids than others. I've been told, for instance, of someone who is a reformed mommy blogger. I know that term rubs some people the wrong way, but this person had used it in a self-identifying way. A reformed mommy blogger whose child started middle school and was greeted by printouts of that mom's content from her blog, printed out and posted on lockers down the hallway. And the mom hadn't written anything that she thought was embarrassing or invasive. But of course, what you think is appropriate when you're writing as a mother of a toddler may feel very different when your 12 or 13-year-old is confronted with it on their first day of middle school. So I really feel very strongly that even our good faith attempts to say, I'm proud, I'm excited, my child can ride their bike, my child is going to prom, my child was potty trained, that can backfire when we take a more developmentally focused, play-based view of what childhood and adolescence should be.
Right. And, I love what you said about childhood being reserved as a protected space. I think, if I had access to, Twitter right now, I would tweet that out. That's such a great message. And, Elio has written in saying, as an example of, how a picture might, for example, backfire later. Many of the security questions is, what's your first pet, right? Speaking of hamsters and dogs, putting out the name of that, right? That's now a security password guess that you can put in. So
that is absolutely right. That's a big one. And that's a big one for kids themselves as they have more and more accounts, right? So now our kids in the pandemic reality are needing to open more accounts under their names to do a lot of digital learning. So it's a security and privacy risk to those children's accounts. It's also a potential security and privacy risk to parents' accounts. And of course, parents and grandparents have more accounts that are linked to financial information or, hospital records. And, maybe your security question isn't, as a parent, what was the name of your first pet, but it might be, what is the name of your pet? Or you may have made a password that has your child's hamster's name in it. I have not, so I'm comfortable giving that example. But it puts the whole family at risk as well.
Yeah. And, there's so many of these psychology games that we're seeing on, Facebook or whatnot, to answer a few questions and learn what kind of, Disney character you are or whatever. But, a lot of people don't know that this information that's being harvested, it sounds innocent, but it's data that's being harvested. It's psychological blueprints that are being harvested and being sold to these data brokers. And so, I had this question later in this interview for you, but I think there's a good transition here to it now, which is, you have a model, which I found intriguing, which is a framework that can help parents, teachers, or guardians, make better decisions about protecting their children's data. So can you share more about this framework that you've come up with?
Thank you. I refer to it as a thought compass. And again, not trying to be sort of, legal academic cutesy, but actually trying to be very concrete that these questions about digital privacy and digital life more broadly are incredibly complex and multi-layered. So while there are concrete steps we can take sort of at a micro level immediately, and I have some of those for later in the interview as well, when we are trying to orient ourselves to how to think about the current and emerging questions that will arise in this space, we need to be anchoring ourselves at the level of values and principles to help us steer our course. And the 4 principles that I've grounded the thought compass that I propose in Sharonhood in are, you can see right there at the top, play. I believe firmly that all adult stakeholders, whether we are parents or teachers or lawmakers or law enforcement or whoever we are, we need to be thinking of childhood as a protected space to play, to make mischief and make mistakes and grow up better for having made them. And of course, how that manifests, how that value manifests will look different for different people at different times, depending on the demands of their role. I'm certainly not saying if you are an assistant principal and somebody comes to your office and they have been accused of bullying another student, that you should automatically say, oh, you were just joking around, let's not worry about it. No. But you should try to have in place a framework at your school that proceeds from a developmentally based supportive commitment to the idea that young people are still learning. And so rather than just kind of, clicking a box on a social and emotional behavioral learning system, which does exist, and saying to the student who is alleged to have been a bully, please go do these modules on appropriate social and emotional behavior. Maybe that's a necessary component of your intervention, but if you're just turning it over to technology, you are missing the boat on creating a meaningful learning experience, and you are putting that child in jeopardy of having their intimate information. So they go in and they do the modules, and they may be asked questions about really invasive topics, and maybe they are in a home where there is abuse or trauma or lack of resources. And that comes out in the answers they give in the module. And all of a sudden, you are putting their private information into a third-party system in a way that could make them vulnerable. So that's kind of my value of play. Next is respect. I think that it's so important for us to remember, especially as we are having our kids do more and more of their schoolwork and their extracurricular work online, that they're generating ideas. They are generating intellectual property. And I'm not going to come in with some top-down lawyerly, schools should start compensating students for, the materials they generate under the copyright, work for hire or something. But I do think that we need to be really mindful, especially as artificial intelligence gets smarter and smarter, and as we get more and more reports of kids' likenesses or output being used by tech companies in ways that we didn't anticipate, we need to be thinking about setting up digital life in a way that respects our children's autonomy and their intellect and their output. So an example of a little surprise that parents across the country had earlier this fall was front page of the hard copy of the New York Times, was an article on how your child's photos are powering bleeding edge surveillance technologies. And an investigation had found that social media pictures that parents had posted of children, some of them toddlers, back in 2004 or 2005, had been scraped from the social media sites and were being used to train facial recognition software. Parents didn't know that was happening. They weren't affirmatively asked for consent. At a national level, the legal protections to stop that from happening were not so good. Fortunately, there was a biometric privacy provision in an Illinois statute that at least allowed people who'd had that happen to them in Illinois to have some redress against the company. But again, that's few and far between. And then the other 2 values are forget and connect. So the internet is set up to remember. And we need to be really mindful that when we are talking about children, part of their ability to grow up is to grow out of certain phases. And so, concrete daily life example, how is your child going to feel if in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, they find your Facebook post about how they're not wetting their bed anymore? They're not going to feel so great. They probably would rather have that forgotten. And guess what? Probably better for their development and your relationship with them if it could be forgotten, even if you mean it as a point of pride at the time. And last but certainly not least is the value of connect. E.M. Forster, the novelist, said, only connect. And I do think that imperative is so true. And by that, I don't mean be a Luddite and break all your devices. We need our devices now in an existential way. I wouldn't be talking to you folks if we didn't have them. But you can connect directly with your kids, whether they're your kids in your home or your kids in your classroom, about how you are using technology while you use the technology. So instead of just saying, we're going to go online for remote learning because we have to, because it's not safe to be in the classroom, you can also say, and here are the modules you have to do to learn your math. And let's now have a lesson on the digital citizenship basics that will go into your using those modules. So it's a little meta, but I think it's really important. So that's my thought compass.
Wonderful. Thank you for framing it in this way. And, I think one of the mantras here is that the internet lives forever, right? What we put on there, you can't erase it. People are taking their screenshots, there's logs of this. One, I guess, thought compass that I use before I post anything online is, will my grandmother be proud of this, right? Not my friends, not my peer network, will my grandmother, right? Because that's
I love that.
The lens that I want to look at it from. And so maybe the lens here is, will your child be proud of this as a representation of them in 10, in 15, in 20 years?
Yes, I love that. And that is a thought compass that I think folks can find very meaningful. Another one that I sometimes talk about with audiences is a thought compass of, for those of us old enough to remember, hard copy holiday letters. Is this something that you would put in a hard copy holiday letter and send to everyone from your boss to your great aunt? And if it's at the level of, Susie graduated from high school this year, right? That's the kind of thing that tends to make it into a holiday letter, not Susie finally stopped having temper tantrums when we took her to restaurants. If it really is at that level of sort of public-facing achievement, or something that is just more of a fact of a rite of passage, I think that that's a fine thing to share about your children in ways that are privacy protecting. So for instance, I still wouldn't put my child's full name, their exact date of birth, or anything like that. But saying Susie graduated from school, could be just fine. And so that can be a good shorthand as well.
Great. And you'd mentioned a little bit about being responsible digital citizens. So let's get into that. I do want to get into specific steps that we can take on protecting our children in the home and in the classroom, and we're going to get to that next. But first, let's talk about digital literacy, because as we reside in an increasingly digitalized world, we have de facto become digital citizens. And I was a little confused about this term prior to this talk, so I did a little digging, and I found a definition that I think made sense for me as a layman. Which is that digital citizenship is the self-monitored habits that sustain and improve digital communities you enjoy or depend on. So in order to interact responsibly or effectively as digital citizens, we get to become more digitally literate. So what is digital literacy and how do we become more digitally literate?
That's a great definition. And I would texturize it a bit and also say that at this particular moment, when there really are very few barriers right now between our digital communities and what were previously and will still be in the future our IRL, in real life, or brick and mortar communities, that digital citizenship is more important than ever. So digital literacy, or information quality, refers to a core tenet of digital citizenship. And that is how we develop a toolkit for knowing whether content or people are who they say they are, or if the facts are accurate. And we see a lot of misinformation or disinformation on the internet. And some of it can be pretty innocuous, right? So, at the level of somebody who, before they go on social media, puts a filter on their picture and only takes the snapshot of everyone on the family vacation when everyone's happy, right? That's not misinformation or disinformation, but it is worth knowing and making very clear to our kids as they learn about the digital world that what you see on the internet never tells the whole story. So I think that's sort of the first component of good digital literacy and information quality skills, is that's not the whole story, almost ever. The next one is to be really, really vigilant, both yourself and also as you teach, whether you're teaching your own kids or kids who are students of yours, about fact-checking information. I just saw a news story pop up in my Twitter feed about a miracle solution to COVID. This seems too good to be true. Where can I go to get more information? Well, where I always start would be trusted experts who don't have some sort of monetary or reputational interest in doing anything other than getting the information right. And so those tend to be universities, think tanks, government agencies for the most part, folks who are not out there to sell you something, or to the extent they are out there to sell you something, it's actually, they're just trying to sort of promote their credibility. And I think that regardless of whether a fact you look into with your child turns out to be a real fact or a faked fact, modeling for them, hey, if something on the internet doesn't seem quite right, we need to cross-check it. That is so important. And last but certainly not least, something that is very much on my mind these days when it comes to digital literacy and information quality is trying to make visible to yourself and to your children not just what's true and what's not true, but also when something is not true, why? Do we have reason to suspect that it's a deliberate untruth? Do we have reason to suspect that it could be misinformation or disinformation coming from a foreign government, for instance? We're not always going to know that as individuals, but we should develop a comfort with ourselves, with the kids in our lives, modeling for them that the people who are, or the entities that are out there spewing misinformation or disinformation, sometimes it can be a good faith mistake. The world moves quickly, right? And discerning what's a mistake and what is sort of deliberate is important. But also, why might they want to do that? And I'm not trying to say that we should ourselves or that we should teach our children to develop a view that reality is something that can never be nailed down. To the contrary, I think we need to hold fast to the view, both with ourselves and for our children, that reality is something that can be nailed down, but somewhat counterintuitively, even as we have more and more information in the form of digital updates, it can be harder and harder to do that.
Right, because we can only act according to the information that we are given, and if the information quality, is compromised, then it's going to be challenging for us to act as responsible digital citizens, because we're all going to be acting based on the information that's out there. And I liken the internet, it's like the wild, wild west sometimes, right? And there's a beauty to the freedom of the wild, wild west. But it's also an ungoverned area where many different interests can come in and can compromise our ability to act effectively in that realm. So I think we have people commenting in, our ability to create critical thinkers is going to be vital at this time.
Yes. And
so, I want to get into a little bit about how we can equip our teachers and parents, because I know we have a lot of teachers, school administrators, and social workers and parents on the line today. So can you share with us some specific steps on how caregivers can better safeguard their children's experiences online and in the classroom? And we can start with the home, or I'm not sure how you organized your list, but however you want to take it.
Thank you. Yes, I have I've actually combined my list, and then I have sort of a little bit more specifics to share about the different spheres, because I think actually it's very much the same values-based, thought compass now mapping into this checklist, but some different specifics for the different setups. So the first item on on my checklist is to go low tech or no tech whenever possible. And again, I'm not a Luddite. You're not going to hear me say, throw away your phones, but I am going to say things like, to use an example in the home, after I finished writing Parenthood, they came out with a smart diaper. I think it's Pampers sells it now. And I was so upset that it didn't make it into my books. It's such a great example. But you can now buy sensor-enabled diapers that will track your child's urine output. And I would say that unless a pediatric urologist is telling you that there's a medical reason to get that kind of data, don't do it. Go low tech. Actually go no tech. Just look at the stripe on the outside of the diaper or give the diaper a pat and see if it's wet. The potential privacy harms to biometric data being collected about an infant by a private company and potentially reshared, I don't think it's necessary. Why even go there? And the answer to why many people go there is like, it's cool and it's fun. And I'm all for things being cool and fun. I'm not trying to stifle innovation or exploration. And I agree with you about the importance of keeping the internet generative and free. But the internet is not generative and free when we are fueling it with our kids' private information in a way that really could come back to harm them. So that's an example of going no tech at home. Schools right now, it is harder, because schools have to do things virtually for the foreseeable future, but there are still lower tech ways to do things virtually. So here's an example of that. Instead of giving a child an app to do art or do math or do any sort of part of the curriculum, come up with an in real life exercise that they can do and then email you a picture. Or, get on a Zoom call or a Google Meets, which are not completely secure, but they're going to be gathering less identifying information about each child's identity and output than going into Google Meet and holding up and saying, here's the drawing I did, rather than doing it right into the app. And there are huge equity concerns with that approach. Not all children will have a parent around to help them with an activity. But honestly, the equity concerns are going to exist with having children do things through an app as well. Many kids, depending on their ages, still need adult help to do that. So I would say, an equity, huge concern in terms of getting kids online when they need to be and getting them the devices that they need. But to the extent that we're now in a reality where a fair amount of digital learning is going to be necessary, likely going forward, try to use that in a lower tech way. So that's my first suggestion. My next one is to think about security in home and in school. And I'm going to give you a personal example for this. So as Samir shared with you, these are things that I've been researching and writing about for a long time. He also shared that I'm a mom. I had a funny experience a couple of weeks ago with my 9-year-old. I was doing a Zoom meeting with some colleagues through University of New Hampshire, and my son was waiting for me to finish placing an Instacart order. He really wanted bubble gum. And I had told him I'll do it after the meeting. And I have facial recognition enabled on my phone, which is a privacy no-no, but it is an efficiency shortcut and one that I personally have decided I'm going to do. There are many that I don't, but that is one that I did. So I'm here, I'm at this very same laptop, at this very same credenza, involved in a very intense discussion about our summer programming. And all of a sudden, my son comes in, and I see him kind of out of the corner of my eye, and then he just does this. And then, so he unlocked my phone and completed the Instacart order and then left the room. And wow. I just started laughing because, in some ways, it's on me. I was, right? I was kind of impressed with his problem solving. It's on me for having facial recognition. I wanted the Instacart order anyway, although we did get more bubble gum probably than I would have. But I said something about it in a staff meeting a couple of days later, kind of as a joke. And one of my colleagues in our IT department sent me a message that was mostly joking, but kind of sincere. And he said, just remember that securing your devices is the first step to cybersecurity. And he's right. So that's an example of something that really was innocuous, right? I mean, the only personal information taken was my face. I don't mind if my son has that or my phone has it. But at this moment, when people are trying to do everything they can from home, we do have a situation in which parents' work materials, kids' academic materials, kids' telehealth visits, a parent's therapy session. So much is happening remotely, and devices are sort of all over the place, whether they're your own devices or a work-issued device or a school-issued device that you may be borrowing because you can't afford your own. So there are some very concrete security concerns around securing devices. And security concerns, of course, lead to privacy harms. And so one thing I would say for teachers, social workers, parents, is it is not overkill, either within your classroom or within your home or within your professional life, to get very granular about which devices has my classroom given out, who has them. Do the people who have them, have we gone through some digital citizenship basics with them about how to secure these? And really write that up. In the home, you may not have to write it up. It may be as simple as all the devices in our home live in this docking station unless you are using them, so we know where they are at all times. For people who are issuing devices in a professional context, or using them in their homes in a professional context, I would have some sort of written documentation or plan. It doesn't have to be elaborate. Of, here are the devices that my school has given out. Here is who has them. Here's the training we have given them, and so on. So yes, security matters in the home as well. It's my next bullet. My third one, and I don't think I can say this too many times, is please, please, please make sure that the pictures you are taking of your children or the pictures that you are receiving about your students or your clients are kids who are fully clothed. There are so many very innocent ways that you can wind up with a picture of a child who's not fully clothed, right? It's, people are playing in the sprinkler, or it's a newborn and they're just in a diaper. I'm not saying any of that is predatory or problematic, but I am saying that once the image is on the internet doesn't forget, and you lose control over where it goes. And so you do not want images of children in your home or under your supervision to get out in the world and either be repurposed by child abusers who can Photoshop or otherwise alter those images, or just maybe not having the image Photoshop, but just having it wind up in sort of an algorithmically generated YouTube set of recommendations that take viewers from, here are kids at the beach, here are kids in the sprinkler, to here are pictures of children that are abusive and illegal. So, if your kid is looking really cute, playing in the sprinkler on a sunny day, and you really want the grandparents to see it, halfway across the country, text it. That's still sharing. That's still digitally transmitting an image of a child. But the odds of it then winding up in some sketchy, YouTube compilation are far smaller. So really be vigilant about that. And I do think this is particularly important for schools that are sending home devices or asking kids to do things online that they didn't previously. Real world example, something that came to me once when I was at a conference down in DC, was a school system that had gone to one-on-one iPads for their kindergartners. So each kindergartner had an iPad. And this was still when everything was in brick and mortar. And a famous legal principle I like to call, what do you expect? The kids got into trouble with the iPads. One kindergartner took the iPad into the bathroom, took a picture of another kindergartner going to the bathroom. The picture was on the iPad backed up to the school server, and before you know it, it is teacher, principal, law enforcement, and lawyers, because that school system now has an image of a new child on its server. And so you really want to try to be working, and I'm not trying to put this all on teachers at all. I think you want to be working collaboratively with your school leadership, probably your district level leadership, and ideally with some sort of technologist or security specialist, because these things are hard to stay on top of. We've already talked, Samir, about digital literacy and information quality. I would, so I'm not going to repeat everything I said there, but I would just say, if you are a teacher, build that into your lessons. You don't have to teach a separate lesson on it, but every time you are doing social studies and you are having children gather information about something that's happening in another country, ask them, where did you get this? Why did you get it from here? Have you checked to make sure it's accurate? Right? The number of times I was hearing, well, China's responsible for the coronavirus. No, just So it's, really there's just a lot of misinformation and disinformation out there that our kids of all ages are receiving. I teach law students, I should say. Two more. I really strongly recommend to avoid digital surveillance and digital tracking of kids. There may be circumstances in which it is necessary. If you are in a situation, let's say, where you have had to go back to work, you can't afford childcare, your child is legally old enough to be home alone for certain periods, but it's really important to you that you always have a way to know where your child is. By all means, there are watches that can track your child's whereabouts and so on. But if it's not essential, I think that it does not teach kids to be self-reliant to track them. And again, you don't know where that information's going or how it could be used. Last but certainly not least, get involved. In addition to being involved and asking these questions within your school system, modeling the behaviors in your classroom or your home or your professional practice, get involved. And getting involved, I think, looks like being part of conversations like these. It looks like contacting decision makers in your school system or your state or nationally. It involves reaching out to tech companies and saying, hey, I don't want to use your products unless I know more about what you're doing to protect child privacy and promote good digital citizenship.
Wonderful. I think those are really great pocket checklists that's applicable for all parents and teachers and social workers who might be on the call today. And Ilya is also chiming in with some great resources. For example, he just posted into the link the irreparable harm of placing children on sex offender registries in the U.S. So there's helpful documents there. One question that's come in, is there an effective way for kids to opt out of surveillance if, for example, a school has chosen to use Google Apps for schools, or if there's maybe like programs that schools are using that you might not be a big fan of from a digital privacy standpoint?
That is such an important question. So I recommend, first, it would have to be the parents unless the child is over 18. So I recommend that parents ask very clear, very firm, yet respectful questions about the kinds of products that are being used. It may well be that schools are introducing these types of products without getting upfront parental consent and relying on certain exceptions to the need for upfront parental consent that are embedded in our big three federal laws on youth privacy in schools, as well as our state laws. But even if the school said, well, we didn't need your consent for Google Apps, we use the legitimate school official exception under FERPA, for instance, you can still say, I would like to talk to you and your principal and the school district about this. We need to rewrite our policy on when and how we use these apps. And also, I am requesting that you give my child a low-tech or a no-tech way to access this classroom activity. Very often, that is enough to get your child sort of a workaround. But I would say even if you can get a workaround for your child, you want to be able to keep the conversation going at the community level, because there are huge gaps in our legal framework. And yes, we need to make sure that we fill those gaps, but there's so much room right now for community-based and market-based transformation. So a parent who says, hey, Google Apps isn't cool with me, we need to do this in a low-tech or a no-tech way, even during a pandemic, that's changing norms and behaviors. So even if that's not a legally required change, you can still get that change made and therefore set in motion future changes, possibly to the law, possibly just to community expectations in your own school system.
Wonderful. And any last questions, we'll try to squeeze it in. So if you have any questions, please put it into the chat. Meanwhile, one last question for me, which is, what can we do? How can we become better advocates for effective policies on internet security and become responsible digital citizens? Because I think in many ways, of course, innovation outpaces legislation. And so what can we do to become better advocates?
Thank you so much for that question. Well, first, what you are doing, Samir, you and your team, is core to becoming better digital advocates. You're bringing together invested, concerned folks with different areas of expertise and background to talk directly to each other. That is collective education in action, and that is so important. I have a few guides for further reading, some legal background. The youth and media team at the Berkman Klein Center that I've long been a part of does great work. Global Kids Online out of the London School of Economics and UNICEF. I also recommend some good old-fashioned book reading. I have 3 books there that are so important for understanding the background of our digital world. I also, if you do want to check out Sharenthood, which has an open access free version you can get online, I've got some book club questions here. And I also really hope that people will stay in touch directly with me. I've got contact information right there, and some of the best ways for all of us to engage collectively is to bring forward to researchers like me specific examples of, hey, this is happening in my school or in my community, and I am going to bring it forward to you so you can check into whether or not it's legit.
Wonderful. And are there any good sources that you might have on hand for people studying and comparing the privacy implications of platforms for kids?
Common Sense Media has some really good information. I think the Future of Privacy Forum also does. And I think that the school consortium, this Steve Smith's operation out of Cambridge, why am I currently blanking on the name? Steve Smith, who has been the longtime chief information officer of the Cambridge School District in Massachusetts, has a great consortium for schools and other stakeholders on the digital privacy components of ed tech products specifically.
Wonderful.
I highly recommend that.
Well, thank you, Leah. And if you've enjoyed today's event, please visit Leah's personal website at leahplunkett.com. If you'd like to ask her any questions, don't hesitate to tweet at her. Her email address is right there on the screen. You can also message her on LinkedIn. Links to all of her social media channels are being posted into our chat right now. Aijan will be posting that, so thank you for sharing that, Aijan. You can also purchase her wonderful book, Sharenthood, where you're going to get all this lowdown and more on Amazon. So a link to that will be shared in the chat as well. And we love getting your feedback. So if any of you have any thoughts or feedback or questions to share, please get in touch with us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, or Twitter using hashtag NoLimitGen. Finally, we're a nonprofit organization. Our mission is to keep this excellent programming open for all to access. So we're grateful if you consider donating to us through our website at nolimitgen.org. Special thank you to those who helped us organize this event, our events producer, Aijan Ryanbeck, Chris Phillips, and of course, our wonderful guest, Leah Plunkett. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. It's been wonderful to be here, and I'm sorry I was just being a bad digital citizen for a second and multitasking, but it was for a good cause. The outfit that I referenced out of Cambridge, Steve Smith, who was a great longtime CIO in Cambridge, is the National Student Privacy Consortium. So I hope folks check that out too.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Leah, and thank you to our wonderful audience. Have a wonderful day.